I'm Emily, and this is the M Project, where I'm talking about mental health, mindfulness, the meaning of life, and everything in between. I want to talk about something today that is challenging to talk about. It's uncomfortable to talk about. It's not often talked about, and that's why I think it's all the more important to talk about, and that is suicide. I want to start by saying I am not a doctor. I am not a mental health professional. This is all from personal opinions and experiences. And I also want to say, if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation, I have linked resources in the description, and please always feel free to DM me there, to reach out to me via email. My email is on my website. I would love to be able to be there for you. And just a reminder that you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are not your fault, and you deserve to be here. And it will get better, I promise. And so with that, the reason that I want to talk about suicide is that in the mental health space, we talk about mental health awareness, and we talk about removing the stigma around mental health, and what does that mean? And there is this systemic stigma that exists around mental health and around suicide specifically, and it's fueled by us not being able to talk about it, by us not having these safe outlets to have conversations about it and to be able to safely and calmly talk about these things that are uncomfortable and that are scary, and to really shift the narrative and to be able to destigmatize mental health and suicide. And I think that starts with having conversations, because when we're able to relate to others about things, when we're able to talk about things to others, we're able to bring awareness to things with others and in community, then we're also able to do that with ourselves. And I notice that the opposite happens when there is this stigma and there is this shame around mental health challenges and around suicide, where because it's not safe to talk about it with other people, then it's not safe to even be aware of it in ourselves, and it leads to all of this shame and all of this stigma within ourselves around these sort of thoughts, and this idea that they're our fault and that there's blame involved when there's not. And when we're not able to admit it to ourselves, then there's this shame, and shame inherently blocks the flow of energy, thoughts and emotions and life, it's flowing through us and we're flowing through it. But shame consciously suppresses and blocks the flow of energy. It keeps things in, it stores them in there, and it prevents them to move through us. It prevents us to be able to see them, for them to come up, and for us to explore them and to question them and hopefully ultimately release them. And so that's my goal in having these conversations, is that if we can talk about it, maybe we can also, relate to it differently in ourselves. And I know that has been something for me that has been life-changing and life-saving, is to be able to relate to my mental health in a new way, to be able to relate to those thoughts that for so long didn't want to be here in a new way, and to have more compassion for myself, to have more compassion for them, to have more understanding for them, to be able to explore them, to be able to talk about them safely and not be scared of them, and to be able to remove some of the fuel that they have and to question them. And I think that all of this comes from us being able to have safe conversations about it. So, in my experience, when I was experiencing some pretty extreme mental health challenges, very often my thoughts were telling me that not being here would be better than what I was experiencing. And they were scary, and I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to about it, and I didn't want to. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to put that burden on anyone else. And then I experienced a lot of shame around it, so I kept it inside, because I felt like I was ungrateful and I was privileged, and all these things that I've mentioned in past videos, that prevented me from feeling like I could safely express these thoughts that I was having. And so I just pushed them deeper, and I didn't give myself the space to explore them and to get perspective and tools and to question them. And they felt like me, and they felt like they were true. And they felt like they were an accurate representation of myself and of reality. And it wasn't until through meditation I was able to create enough space from these thoughts to see them as something outside of myself, where I had the safety in my nervous system to be able to explore them, to be able to question them, to be able to explore their roots, and to realize that they weren't my fault and they weren't me. And with my personal experience, I had a pretty extreme hormonal imbalance at the time that I think came from being on birth control for 8 years. And I studied birth control, and that there are increased rates in suicide in women who take birth control. And I had gut dysbiosis, and I studied how our guts impact our mental health. And chronic stress, which can lead to inflammation in the brain, which can lead to symptoms of mental health. And I started to see my mental health as this symptom, or it's interesting because, if you get a rash, if you get a stuffy nose, like you see it as a symptom of a virus, of, whatever else. But our mental health doesn't feel that way. Our thoughts don't feel that way. They don't feel like symptoms. They just feel like the narrator. They feel like us. They feel like they're true. And so when I was able to, through this research and through this safety, to explore the thoughts that had once been scary and had once been shameful, that I could realize that my thoughts are symptoms of these underlying health conditions, of these other factors, and that just further communicated to me they're not my fault, I'm not to blame, and I shouldn't have this shame around them. And so if we can talk about and we can learn and we can share all of these different factors that are impacting our mental health, then maybe you can experience your mental health as a symptom. And you can actually question, is there mold in my home? Have I been really stressed lately? Am I on social media a lot? Have I been on a pharmaceutical that says that, in the laundry list of side effects, that suicide is a potential side effect, or suicidal ideation, or depression, or anxiety, or all of these things that tend to just feel like they're us. But I think with that space, with that safety, with removing that stigma and that shame, we're able to explore, and we're able to get the tools and the resources and make the changes to really support our mental health. And I also want to mention, so I am very particular to use the words died by suicide or lost their life to suicide. So I've mentioned that I've lost 2 close friends to suicide, and I use those words, and I do so very intentionally and very carefully, as opposed to you might hear other people say, someone took their life or someone killed themselves. And the reason that I'm so particular around those words was actually a perspective that was shared with me a few years ago that I really resonated with and have adopted, and that's that we, our true self, our true self underneath the thoughts, underneath the stories, because I believe that that's not us. We are something deeper underneath that. That our true self underneath those thoughts does not play an active role in suicide or in suicidal ideation. And so using phrases like killed themselves, like took their lives, suggests that someone's playing an active role in that decision, which I don't believe. I believe that someone lost their life to this disease in the same way that if someone lost their life to cancer or to a heart attack, that suicide is no different. And I think words can carry so much meaning, and they can also carry so much miscommunication. And so without thought around the words that we're using, we're kind of inadvertently suggesting this shame and this stigma. And so that's why I'm really careful around the words that I do use. And I'm so grateful to Olivia, who had shared this with me a few years ago. So 2 years ago, I hosted a mental health panel for Mental Health Awareness Month, and it was sponsored by PIM, Prepare Your Mind, which is an amazing amino acid supplement company for mood support, mental health, stress resilience. And the company is founded by Zach and Olivia Williams. So Zach Williams is the late Robin Williams' son who lost his life to suicide. And I hosted this panel, and I had Zach Williams speak on the panel. And at the beginning of the panel, I had introduced my story and why I was planning this event. And Olivia, Zach's wife, co-founder of PIM, she came up to me after the event and she pointed out that I had used the phrase took their lives. So I had said that my friends took their lives. And she shared with me her perspective and why she's really intentional around not using those words. And that's that our brain as an organ's primary function is to keep us alive. And when you are experiencing suicidal ideation, or God forbid someone loses their life to suicide, your brain is doing the complete opposite. In its expression of how we relate to our brain, which is most notably our thoughts, if our thoughts are telling us that we don't want to be alive, that's our brain as an organ failing at its primary function. And how is that any different than heart failure, liver failure, kidney failure? So why do we see suicide in a different way, and why do we talk about suicide in a different way? And it was a really eye-opening conversation for me, and ultimately changed the way that I speak about suicide, that I relate to suicide. And I believe that that's true. I believe that we do not play a conscious role in this, and that as I mentioned, that if our thoughts can often be these symptoms of so many underlying factors, often physical disease, that's just the symptoms of our brain not being able to perform its functions, whether from disease, from lack of nutrients, lack of sleep, whatever it is, so many different things, and it expresses itself in the form of these thought patterns. And so that was even really helpful for me, going back to my experience and unraveling even more of that shame, and just having this new perspective around our thoughts, around our mental health, and around suicide. And in being able to develop a safer relationship, with these uncomfortable things, with our mental health, with things like suicide, and working in this space and being so passionate about the topic, I've had a few friends who have, expressed to me that they're experiencing suicidal ideation, and they've expressed that they don't feel safe to tell a professional, to talk to their therapist about it, because they're afraid that they're going to report them. And that is the requirement, and not to say that that's bad. I think that it's very important that these things are taken very seriously. But the question is, how can we create a safer environment when the outcome that's coming out of something like this requirement to report is that people are too scared to talk about it? Because that's not what we want. What we want is that if they do talk about it, that we can take the necessary steps to help them. But what's happening is that people don't feel safe enough to bring it up because they're scared, and they're scared that they're going to be sent away, and it's traumatizing, and they're scared of being judged, and they have all of this shame. And so how can we create safer environments for people to be able to express how they're feeling, so that we can, bring it up and bring it out, and we can explore it, and we can share a perspective that, maybe they're experiencing some sort of physical condition that's leading to expressions of mental health. Or something else that's been really helpful for me is just better understanding that, like, my brain and all of our brains are trying to solve problems, and they're trying to analyze, and if you're experiencing pain, or you're unhappy, or you're going through a hard time, or life isn't turning out the way that you want it to, like, your brain comes up with a solution, and that solution is you will no longer have to deal with this thing if you're not alive. It's not a good solution, but I think when we don't have the safety to, like, step outside of ourselves and to see that and to talk about it and to be able in community to uncover that, the thought just comes and it's scary and it feels like it's real. But if we can create a little bit of space, we can talk about it with a friend, which I've been able to share with these friends. It's like, your brain is just trying to solve a problem, and it's providing a really poor solution to that problem. Create a little space from it, realize that it's not a good solution, and come up with some other solutions to that problem, giving it a little less validity and a little less truth. It's life-changing and it's life-saving. And another perspective that I share with them that has been a tool that's been really helpful for me, because those thoughts still come, and now I know, because of the journey that I've been on and the perspective that I have and all of my experiences, even when those thoughts come, I see them as symptoms. I see them as the outdated programming. I see them as my brain just trying to solve a problem and doing so in a poor way. And it doesn't feel like me anymore. You know, I know I'm not scared of it anymore. I know that it's never, I'm not going to take action on it. And I'm so grateful. And it truly, you know, it's life-saving having that perspective and that relationship with my mental health and with these heavier and scarier thought patterns. But another perspective that I use for myself when those thoughts do come up is, you know, I believe that we were consciousness before we were born, and we'll be consciousness after we die. So that's what we are for eternity. That's our experience for eternity. And we get this human experience in our brain, in this body, in this life, in this lifetime, in this present moment. We get this right now only once. You know, I don't know anything about past lives, future lives, but like in our current consciousness, in our current awareness of consciousness and experience that we're having in this body, we only get that once. Don't jump ahead to where you're going early. You know, that's where you're going to be for eternity. Like, don't get there sooner. Experience all that this life has to offer, and that is pain, and that is discomfort, and that is life going differently than we had planned. And like, how incredible that we get to feel all of those things, that like we get to feel the visceral, painful emotions that come with life, because that's not always going to be the case. Make the most of it. Like, be here. You know, don't jump to where you're going sooner than you have to. And that's been something that's been really helpful for me, and I don't know if it's helpful for you, but I wanted to share. And, you know, this was probably messy. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have. It's a topic that's not often talked about, but I think it's a really important one, and I am grateful that we can like go through the messiness of figuring out how to talk about it together. And I really want to, you know, just make sure to note that like this, none of this is to say that this isn't serious. Suicide should be taken very seriously, but I think that it should be talked about in a safer way. I think that we should feel safer to be able to talk about, to be able to be there for each other in it, and to figure it out together, and to share resources, and to shift our perspective, and for it to not be so shameful and scary and stigmatizing. So we're a part of that together. I think it's an incredibly important movement. So thank you so much for being a part of it with me. And thank you for being here. It means the world.